My name is Emma, and on a cold night in November of 2023, I experienced something so profound that I know in my heart it was a message from Jesus. If you are a parent, a grandparent, or if you have any young people in your life, please listen carefully. This warning is for all of us. Before that night, I didn't believe in God and was addicted to my mobile phone. But now I feel compelled to speak out and warn as many people as I can. If you've read this, I believe Jesus wants you to hear it, and I want to hear your thoughts. Please comment below whether you agree, disagree, or have your own experience to share. So here's my story. It was a normal Saturday evening. I had just finished dinner with my family and the house was quiet. I found myself sprawled out on the couch in the living room, scrolling through my phone. I switched between Instagram, Facebook, and endless YouTube videos, each clip pulling me deeper into a cycle of distraction. Time seemed to slip away, but I didn't even notice. The feeling of scrolling through endless content was almost comforting, though it didn't really fulfill me. My parents had gone upstairs to their room, and my younger brother had already retreated to his, leaving me alone in the soft glow of my screen. I don't know exactly when it started, but something felt off. It was as if I could sense the stillness of the house, and yet I felt a growing unease. My head began to feel heavy, and my eyes grew blurry. Felt like the walls were closing in on me. I thought maybe I'd been staring at the screen too long. I told myself I'd get up and take a break, but before I could even stand, everything went dark. I woke up, but it wasn't like any normal waking moment. I wasn't in my living room anymore. I was floating. I was above myself, staring down at my own body, slumped on the couch, my phone still gripped tightly in my hand. I could see everything clearly, but I couldn't move. Panic swept over me. Was I dead? Was this some kind of dream? I couldn't speak, couldn't cry out. And then a brilliant light broke through the darkness. It wasn't just light though, it was alive with a warmth I'd never felt. I turned and there he was, Jesus. He wasn't what I expected. He didn't look like the portraits I'd seen in church or the images in children's Bible books. He was more radiant than I could have imagined, not just in appearance but in presence. His love and authority filled the space around him. It was a love that was stronger than anything I had ever known. I wanted to fall to my knees, but I couldn't move. "Come," he said, extending his hand toward me. His voice was calm, yet carried with it such power that I couldn't resist. I reached out without thinking. The moment I took his hand, everything around us vanished. Felt as if we were standing in a vast, endless space. But the space wasn't empty. Everywhere I looked, glowing screens filled the air, phones, tablets, laptops, televisions, even smartwatches, all hovering in the air like they were alive. The screens weren't simply devices. They held something. They were filled with faces, millions of faces. But their eyes were empty, like they were trapped, staring into nothing. Their faces stared back at me, unblinking and unfeeling. The look in their eyes was haunting. Jesus looked at me and gestured toward the screens. "This," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow, "is the battlefield." I didn't understand. "It's just technology," I said. "Just entertainment, right?" Jesus turned to me, and the sadness in his eyes nearly broke my heart. "It started that way," he replied. "But what you see as harmless is far from it. The enemy has turned these devices into a weapon. They are being used to steal hearts, minds, and souls. Technology was meant to be a tool, a gift to help, but it has become a trap." I looked closer at the screens, and then I saw them. Chains. Thin chains extending from each screen, wrapping around the wrists, necks, and even the hearts of people. Some of them were bound so tightly they could hardly move. And every chain had a word etched into it: loneliness, despair, addiction, envy, greed, shame. I whispered, "They don't even know they're chained." "That," Jesus said, "is the enemy's greatest trick. to enslave them without them even realizing it. The screens began to flicker and turn red, flames licking at the edges of the devices. And then something more terrifying happened. The symbol, a dark and ominous mark, began glowing on the screens, then on people's foreheads, their hands. It was as though the symbol was being branded onto their skin. "What is that?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear. Jesus' gaze hardened, his tone now filled with grave urgency. "It is not yet the mark of the beast," he said, "but it is preparing them to accept it. The enemy is conditioning their hearts to worship him instead of me. They are being trained to value comfort, approval, and quick gratification above all else. When the time comes, they will accept the mark without hesitation." My breath caught in my throat. I thought of how many hours I had spent mindlessly scrolling. How many times I'd compared myself to others and felt unworthy because of what I saw online. The arguments I'd had with my family when they told me to get off my phone. I had always thought they were being overly strict. But now I saw the truth. The scene shifted, and suddenly we were no longer in that dark space surrounded by glowing screens. I found myself standing in the middle of what looked like a great battlefield. But this wasn't a war with guns and weapons. No, this war was one of division. On one side, the older generations, parents, grandparents, stood angry and frustrated, pointing fingers at the younger ones. "You're lazy," they shouted. "You're addicted to your phones. You don't understand real life." On the other side, the younger generations, teens, young adults, were shouting back. "You don't understand. You created this. We're just trying to survive in the world you made for us." And there, in the shadows, the enemy stood, laughing, spreading division. "They were supposed to be united," Jesus said, his voice thick with sorrow. "But the enemy has turned them against each other. The older generations must wake up and realize that their children and grandchildren are under attack. They must fight for them, not against them." I asked, "How? What can they do?" "They must pray," Jesus answered. "They must teach my word. They must lead by example. They must put me first, above all distractions. The enemy has lulled many of them to sleep with the same devices." I looked around and saw it. The older generation, just like the younger one, glued to their screens. They were scrolling through the news, playing games, while their children wandered further and further into the darkness. Then I saw something else. It was a church service, but it wasn't like any church I had known. The sanctuary was filled with people, but they weren't paying attention. Some were on their phones during worship. Others were snapping selfies during the sermon. Pastor preached passionately, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The glow of screens drowned out the presence of God in that place. "This is my house," Jesus said, his voice trembling with both anger and sorrow. "But it has become a marketplace for distractions. My people no longer seek me with their whole hearts. They seek entertainment, validation, convenience." My heart broke. I wanted to shout to make everyone wake up, but I couldn't. I turned to Jesus, desperate. "What can I do? I'm just one person." Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder and looked deep into my eyes. "You are more than you think you are," he said. "You are my messenger. I have chosen you to warn them. Not just your generation, but all generations." "But they won't listen," I said, tears streaming down my face. "They'll think I'm crazy." "They rejected me too," he replied softly. "But some will hear. Some will see. Speak boldly. Tell them what you have seen. Warn them. The time is short." Suddenly, everything faded. I was back in my living room, my heart pounding, tears still fresh on my face. My phone, still in my hand, felt cold, heavy, sinister. I threw it across the room and fell to my knees, crying out to God like I never had before. I prayed for my friends, for my family, for my generation, and for the older generations too. I prayed for the courage to share what I had seen. If you're reading this, I believe Jesus wants you to hear this warning. This is not just about the younger generation and their phones. It's about all of us. The enemy is using technology to distract, divide, and destroy. He is conditioning our hearts to accept what's coming. If we don't wake up, it will be too late. Parents, grandparents, friends, your role is critical. Pray for your children. Talk to them. Set an example by putting your devices down and seeking God first. And to my generation, don't let the enemy steal your soul through a screen. Seek Jesus. Read His Word. Find your worth in Him, not in likes, comments, or followers. Time is short. The choice is yours.